phrase incentivize and compel, which you used, Ambassador Pratt, I think is an excellent one. Last night, and I know others met with the delegation that traveled here, and I know they're meeting with you and other at state. The head of National Security Advisor, Rabuda, and his delegation, including the Attorney General, I raised the very significant issue of CPC is not forever. You can get off of it, and everybody who gets put on CPC, or especially including on the trafficking laws, and I wrote them, Trafficking Victims Protection Act, I wrote that in the year 2000. And I have met with more delegations who always say, not us, that's, somebody else is doing the trafficking, it's not us. There's always this culture of denial. And that goes for states that are our allies who get put on that list, and that includes CPC, and as well as countries that are not necessarily our allies, like China, which is both a Tier 3 country for trafficking and a CPC country, and has been from the very beginning of implementation of Frank Wolf's famous law, the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. So it's such a familiar refrain, and it flies in the face of evidence, and evidence is what it's all about. The prosecutorial discretion that is not shown in Nigeria to go after and to deploy detectives and protection capabilities from the police, it's just not there. We hear it so frequently, and if it is there, show us. They always say, well, they're bandits, they're this, they're that, but what's the motivation behind Boko Haram? And I went to my opening statement, or would remind you, I kept asking the administration then, why do you keep dismissing that this isn't a radical Islamist organization called Boko Haram? Yeah, they hate moderate Muslims too. I've heard that, like I said, from many imams myself, and they certainly hate Christians and will kill them to procure their ends. So I just, we need to have that in all human rights. I found that be the case. The author of 2 laws on religious freedom. I did the Frank Wolf bill in 2016, which put entities of particular concern, a lot of other things into the law, working with Frank, who's in retirement, Wolf, that champion for religious freedom. And I gotta tell you, every time I talk to a delegation, every single time, they deny it. Every time. And after a while, it's like, what's your denial going to be? So last night when I was talking to this high-level delegation, I know some of my colleagues met with them as well, I said, we're just looking for progress. We're standing with your oppressed people. These Nigerians are not Americans. We do have a very large diaspora. They're wonderful, many in New Jersey, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about in the country, and we stand in solidarity with the oppressed and not the oppressor. And we wrote in the original Religious Freedom Act, and this is very important because they say, well, we're not killing people, we're not doing, well, engaged in or tolerated. Tolerated, when you don't prosecute, when you don't protect, that's toleration, and that's written right into the law as a criteria for designation of CPC. So I know that's what you've done, and I thank you for your due diligence on this. And there are a lot of other groups, left and right, and Amnesty International keeps saying, and I've raised this with the ICC. I've had ICC prosecutors testify at my hearings, particularly on Nagorno-Karabakh, when they were using food as a weapon. We're not signatories to it, but it's out there. Well, Nigeria is. And Amnesty, again, last year, they keep asking, where's the prosecutions for this? Nigeria, Amnesty International petitions the ICC judges to end prosecutors' delaying of justice for atrocity crimes. So are they wrong too? And I do hope that, and without objection, I would ask that article be made a part of the record about Amnesty. So it's very, very concerning, and I do hope that you will know that this is just par for the course. It's just not us, and it gets very, very tiresome. Show us that it's not you. Open it all up. How many of you, where are the prosecutions? We hear from so many Christians that they dial into the police and nobody shows up. And then there's no investigation. One of my sons is a detective. You've got to do detective work. Find out who it is and put them into jail if they're guilty. And that's not happening. They give some numbers. I remember with Nicholas Ceausescu, when I fought against the Securitate, we used to have people coming around this place saying, oh, he has church, he has no religious freedom issues. He allows churches. He was crushing the Jewish as well as the Christian communities through his Securitate, the secret police of Romania. So it's like we just see this reframe over and over again. So if you might want to comment on that, because again, my argument last night to that high-level delegation, we want you to succeed. We absolutely want you to rid yourself of this cancer that hates moderate Muslims and absolutely hates and kills as well Christians.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, as you and I discussed yesterday, the designation, we hope, will sharpen minds and sharpen attention to the issue. As you mentioned, there is a delegation already here now in Washington this week, a very senior delegation. They'll be meeting with the Deputy Secretary of State. They're meeting with Department of War officials as well. And the Secretary of State has directed us at the State Department to work with the Nigerian government on an action plan and to set up a task force to address this issue and use all of the tools that are at our disposal to focus minds and focus attention on this issue. Thank you.
As you mentioned, Chairman, this is not a new issue. This has been going on in Nigeria for several years. President Trump designated Nigeria in 2020, and the previous administration removed Nigeria as a CPC in 2021 and 2022 and 2023. And so a CPC designation, as my colleague just mentioned, focuses the minds of people in Nigeria. It puts the onus on the government of Nigeria to take action to protect its own citizens, including people of all faiths, not just Christians. Muslim communities are affected as well, other communities. And so the CPC designation is a step that starts a conversation that leads to greater engagement with the Nigerian government, because ultimately this is their responsibility.
Let me just, there is talk, while the CPC is not a designation of genocide, there is a very cogent argument to be made that this is a genocide. And I remind people that, again, there's all this denial. I had 3 hearings on the Armenian genocide, and I had sitting right where you're sitting, Mr. McGee, an ambassador from Turkey, who said, if you recognize, and we had a good bipartisan effort going on this, if you recognize the so-called Armenian genocide, we'll throw you out of your base in Incirlik. And I said, what a great NATO partner you are. It was just amazing. We've seen it over and over again. When I went to Darfur and met with Bashir, we then went to the UN, Human Rights Commission, as it was called then, not the Council. We were flabbergasted that they wouldn't call what was happening in Darfur a genocide. And again, I remind everybody, Article 2 says genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, in whole or in part. It's very clear. Now, we're not talking in CPC about genocide, but when we fought against ISIS, and Jeff Fortenberry did a very serious bill because the administration then would not recognize what ISIS was doing to the Chaldeans, and I went and visited with them in that part of the world. I was shocked that they wouldn't do it. We got a bipartisan piece of legislation passed that did recognize the genocide, and then finally John Kerry said, "Okay, we'll call it what it is." So whole or in part. And that's what's happening here, at least in part. And the president did say he's worried about the extermination if it's allowed to continue onward. So I would like to ask, just for the record, the department has 7 positions vacant in our embassy in Nigeria, including the individual rights, religious freedom reports, and the like. I just encourage you to fill those as quickly as possible. I think that would be very helpful if you could. And I yield to Ms. Jacobs.